Lecture 22 The Essence of Reflection is Reflection on Thinking, Part 2. 3. Looking back is not necessarily reflection. The example I gave earlier was to illustrate that the essence of reflection is to think about thinking. To achieve this, reflection does not necessarily require looking back. Of course, many times reflection does involve looking back, reflecting on what has already happened. When something has happened, you have already thought about it at the time. So when you look back now, you are thinking about your previous thoughts, which is reflection. However, as I mentioned earlier, excellent leaders know that looking back does not necessarily mean reflection. I emphasize again that the essence of reflection is to think about thinking. If you do not question your previous thoughts or consider other possibilities when looking back, then you are not truly reflecting. Regarding reflection, there is a Chinese idiom called San Xing Wu Shen, which means, to examine oneself 3 times a day. This idiom comes from Zhengzi, a student of Confucius. In the Analects, Zhengzi has a famous saying, I examine myself 3 times a day. Have I been true to other people's interests when advising them? Have I been sincere in my interactions with friends? Have I practiced what I preach? This passage is very well said and applies to every leader. Zhengzi asked himself 3 questions, and every leader needs to ask themselves these 3 questions, with some modifications. The first question, have I done my best for the organization's work? The second question, have I kept my promises when dealing with clients, employees, and partners? The third question, have I led by example when teaching my subordinates what to do? However, although Zhengzi's 3 questions are important, they are not reflection. Zhengzi did not think about his thoughts again. He just asked himself if he had done these 3 things. These 3 things are thoughts, and Zhengzi did not think about them again. Zhengzi had a standard, and he just checked if he met that standard, but he did not reflect on the standard itself. Many people think that Zhengzi's 3 questions are reflection, but strictly speaking, they are not. Many people think they are like Zhengzi, reflecting every day, but they may not be reflecting. You can say they are summarizing, grading themselves, or checking a list, but that is not reflection. Japanese entrepreneur Kazuo Inamori is different from most people. How does he reflect? Inamori said, unconsciously, I have developed a habit of frequently asking myself, is this okay? Is there a better way? The method he already has is a thought, and Inamori is thinking about that thought again, thinking if there is a better way. This is thinking about thinking, which is reflection. 4. Preemptive reflection. As I mentioned earlier, there are 2 differences between excellent leaders and ordinary people when it comes to reflection. Firstly, they don't just reflect by looking back. Secondly, they know that looking back doesn't necessarily entail reflection. I gave examples of a software company CEO and Mr. Inamori, which illustrate these 2 differences. By now, you should not equate looking back with reflection. The essence of reflection is to think again about your thoughts. Once you have a thought, reflecting on it is thinking about it again. I just talked about reflecting while taking action. But can you reflect before taking action? Of course, you can. When you are planning something and come up with a possibility or a plan, you have a thought. Then you think, is this plan definitely right? Are there any other possibilities? Reflecting on this thought is reflection before taking action. It's not looking back, but it still meets the essence of reflection, which is thinking again about your thoughts. Reflection before taking action can also be called preemptive reflection. How can you do preemptive reflection? Let me teach you a method called premortem. Psychologist Kahneman introduced this method at the Davos Forum. A CEO of a multinational corporation in the audience said, just hearing this makes Davos worthwhile. From this CEO's reaction, we can see that this method is very valuable. I just said that Kahneman introduced this method at the Davos Forum, but he didn't invent it. It was designed by another psychologist, Klein. I translated it as preemptive reflection in Chinese, which is a euphemistic translation. Klein's English term is more graphic. If translated literally, it's called premortem. Klein said that in management, you should do a post-mortem before a project dies. Doing it after it dies may help others, but it won't help the people involved. How can you do a premortem before it dies? Klein suggested the following. You are about to start a big project, and the action plan has been set. Now, sit down and have a meeting. Give everyone a piece of paper. The host announces that it is already 6 months or a year later, and the project has completely failed. We only know that the project has failed, but we don't know why. Now, take 3 minutes to write down why you think the project failed in the end. After everyone has finished writing, gather all the reasons and focus on discussing 2 or 3 of them, as well as the corresponding solutions. This is what Klein called premortem, and I still call it preemptive reflection. Obviously, preemptive reflection is thinking again about your thoughts, which is reflection. If you still don't feel the benefits of premortem, you need to continue listening to the next lecture. In the next lecture, I will tell you what elements reflection needs to have and why premortem is an excellent reflection method.